They laughed at me the instant I reached for a chair at the family table. My cousin Ethan yanked the seat back, glanced at the place card, and sneered loud enough for every ear to catch Rachel, "You don't belong here!" The sound of his voice dripping with disdain cracked through the air, sharper than any carving knife. Laughter burst like fireworks across the table, bouncing off polished wood and glittering crystal. My father lifted his glass as though to christen the humiliation, his eyes gleaming with cruel amusement as he declared, "She was never cut for this family's responsibilities." Their chuckles swelled. Forks clattered against plates, and I stood frozen, a 29-year-old woman relegated to the status of a child in front of the very people who should have been my kin. Someone nudged the small card toward me, the one marked for the side table, the children's corner, a place for in-laws and afterthoughts. That was my seat. That was their verdict. Heat climbed my neck, flushing my face, while the scent of roasted turkey, glazed ham, and cinnamon yams turned sour in my throat. This was Thanksgiving in the Whitmore household, the day when generations gathered under the vaulted ceilings of my grandfather's estate, when tradition was supposed to bind us together. Instead, tradition had become the stage for my humiliation. I gripped the back of the wobbling wooden chair shoved against the wall, its cushion sagging from years of disuse, and sat down as though I were a stranger, trespassing on sacred ground. My cousins smirked. My Aunt Monica leaned in to whisper, her manicured nails tapping the rim of her glass, and her lips curled into a smile so sharp it could cut. Every sound around me magnified the tinkling of silverware against porcelain, the scrape of knives slicing meat, the satisfied hums of people feasting at the table I was not allowed to join. Their laughter did not fade. It lingered, it swelled, and it pressed down on me like a weight meant to break my spine. Ethan leaned back in his chair, wine swirling in his glass, and added with a grin that spread like poison, "Some of us contribute, Rachel. Some of us build legacies. Maybe one day you'll understand." My father chuckled, nodding along as though this cruelty were common sense, and when his eyes flicked toward me there was no warmth, no recognition, only the cold certainty of a man who had already written me off as disposable. For him, my worth had always been measured against the glittering success of others, degrees, titles, businesses, marriages, and by that standard I was invisible. I lowered my gaze to the flimsy napkin resting on my lap, my fingers tightening until my knuckles blanched. I told myself to breathe, to keep my chest from heaving, to let their words slice without giving them the satisfaction of watching me bleed. Because silence, I had learned, could be louder than protest. Silence could hold its own kind of power. Yet inside me, memories collided like shards of broken glass. I remembered being 10, holding up the drawing I made of our family legacy, only to see it tossed into the trash by the same man who now toasted my failure. I remembered being 16, begging to join the family trip to Europe, only to be told that I hadn't earned my place. I remembered being 22, standing in the fluorescent light of a hospital corridor, declining a graduate scholarship so I could sit by my grandfather's bedside, while the others traveled, celebrated, and posed for photographs that never included me. Each memory pulsed under my skin as though they had been waiting for this moment, waiting to remind me that humiliation was not new. It was simply louder tonight. My grandfather's empty chair at the head of the table was a ghost in the room, a silent witness to what his family had become. He would have seen the cruelty for what it was. He would have seen me, but he was gone, and they thought they had won. They thought my silence meant defeat. They thought pushing me to the margins proved their power. I forced my fork into the roasted vegetables on my plate, the taste of rosemary and oil turning to ash in my mouth. Around me, conversations sparked about investments, about new business ventures, about weddings and children, and the kinds of milestones they measured as proof of belonging. No one asked me about my life, my work, my sacrifices. To them, I was nothing but the girl at the corner table, the outsider whose presence was tolerated only to be mocked. My pulse hammered, a steady reminder that humiliation could be endured, but not forgotten. I pressed the napkin to my lips to hide the tremor in my jaw, and when I lifted my eyes, I let them roam across the table from Ethan's smug smile to Monica's sharp glances to my father's raised glass. They looked powerful, untouchable, united. But I knew something they did not. In less than an hour, when the laughter had grown stale and the feast had dwindled, the lawyer seated quietly at the edge of the room would stand. He would unfold a letter written in my grandfather's frail but steady hand, and with a single page he would strip their pride bare. He would turn their laughter into silence, so heavy that even the ticking of the grandfather clock would sound like thunder. And on that night, for the first time in my life, they would be forced to see me not as invisible, not as disposable, but as the only one who had ever truly belonged. My name is Rachel Whitmore. I am 29 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I have lived in the shadows of people who share my last name, but never shared their respect. The Whitmores were old money, the kind of family whose name was carved into plaques at universities, whose estates dotted the coast of Massachusetts like monuments to permanence. They wore their lineage like armor polished and gleaming, and anyone who didn't match their standards was dismissed, forgotten, or humiliated. That role had always been mine. I built a quiet life of my own as a certified public accountant in Boston, paying my rent on time, filing tax returns for families who trusted me with their modest savings, and volunteering weekends at a local shelter. Nothing glamorous, nothing headline-worthy, nothing that would impress the Whitmores. But when my grandfather grew ill, it was me, not my father or my aunts or my cousins who stayed. I gave up a scholarship to finish my MBA abroad. I turned down promotions. I spent countless nights in that hospital room holding his hand, reading aloud when his eyesight failed, guiding him to the garden when his legs refused to carry him. Those moments were not sacrifices to me. They were love. But to my family, they were invisible. They didn't come to visit, and when they did, it was for photographs and appearances, not for the man himself. My father Charles had long ago decided that my worth was negligible. He was 62, tall, broad-shouldered, a man who moved through rooms with declarations instead of conversations. He built his identity on running Whitmore Holdings, the family's sprawling real estate empire, and he saw my cousin Ethan as his natural heir. Ethan was everything I was, not in his eyes, charming, boastful, a graduate of Ivy League halls, though his successes were cushioned by the family's wealth. My Aunt Monica, my father's younger sister, was equally ambitious, equally ruthless. She had married twice, divorced twice, and in her 58 years had perfected the art of whispering poison that could divide entire rooms. She saw me as nothing but an obstacle to be pushed aside, a reminder that the family's legacy was not as flawless as she pretended. The rest of them, uncles, cousins, distant relatives, fell into line. They learned quickly that favor came from mocking the weak link, from laughing at the expense of the one person who couldn't fight back. I had become the family's entertainment, the convenient target whose dignity could be stripped without consequence. Sitting at the children's table that Thanksgiving night, I thought of the years I had spent trying to earn their approval. The piano recitals where I played with shaking hands, only to hear my father say, "Your cousin did better." The report cards I had clutched proudly, only to watch Monica toss them aside with a careless shrug. The Christmas mornings when gifts with my name were smaller, cheaper, or simply absent, as though the act of giving me anything of value was an insult to the family's hierarchy. Still, I had held on to hope because my grandfather Robert Whitmore had been different. He saw me. He thanked me for the hours I spent by his side, for the letters I read to him, for the stories I whispered when the morphine made his mind drift. He told me once, "Rachel, legacy is not what you inherit, it is what you give." I carried that sentence with me like a shield, though I never imagined it would one day matter more than anything. Now, as I watched my father pour wine into Ethan's glass, as Monica leaned close to whisper in his ear, as the room pulsed with smug laughter and self-congratulation, I realized they had no memory of those words. To them, legacy was property lines, stock shares, board seats. To me, legacy was the hours, the sacrifices, the love they had never bothered to give. The lawyer sat quietly near the far end of the room, his presence barely acknowledged by the rest. David Morton had served our family for decades, handling contracts and trusts with a precision that matched his gray suit and neatly folded pocket square. I had greeted him briefly when I arrived, but no one else had bothered. They saw him as a formality, a man paid to rubber stamp their power. But I knew something they did not, that my grandfather had confided in him in those final months, that letters had been drafted documents, signed truths sealed in ink. Still, as I sat at that small, uneven chair, my stomach knotted. I could not stop the thought from clawing at me. What if I was wrong? What if all those nights I spent with my grandfather were simply that nights? What if his words to me had been kindness but not conviction? What if once again I would be humiliated, overlooked, discarded? Hope had betrayed me before. Hope had whispered that if I worked harder, if I stayed longer, if I loved deeper, they would notice, and every time the laughter at my expense proved otherwise. So I pressed the napkin to my lips, swallowed the ache rising in my throat, and told myself to endure just a little longer. Because even if hope had failed me, memory had not. I remembered the way my grandfather's hand squeezed mine when he signed those papers, the way his voice trembled but did not waver when he told me, "They will not see you coming, Rachel, but they will see you at the end." The firelight flickered against the polished wood, the turkey cooled on its platter, and my humiliation burned hotter than the candles on the table. Around me, they celebrated their power, unaware that the very man they had ignored, the man I had loved, had left behind a truth waiting to crack their empire wide open. The toast began innocently enough, or at least that was the mask it wore. My father rose at the head of the table, his glass lifted high, the firelight catching the deep red of his wine. The room hushed for him because it always did. He cleared his throat, adjusted the cufflinks glinting at his wrists, and smiled the smile of a man who believed his word was law. To family, he declared, his voice booming across the vaulted ceiling. To legacy, to those who carry the Whitmore name with pride and who honor it with their achievements. He paused, letting his gaze travel the length of the table until it landed on me, isolated at the corner napkin balled tight in my fist. His smile thinned into a blade. And to those he added who remind us why some branches of a tree never bear fruit. A roar of laughter erupted sharper than the crack of logs in the fireplace. Glasses clinked, chairs scraped, and someone pounded the table as though the cruelty were the funniest joke of the night. My cheeks burned, my stomach lurched, and for a moment I thought I might choke on the air itself. My cousin Ethan leaned forward, his grin wide, his voice carrying over the laughter. "Don't be so hard on her Uncle Charles. Rachel contributes in her own way. She pays rent every month." "That counts, doesn't it?" The laughter doubled, spilling down the table in waves. Ethan leaned back, pleased with himself, sipping his wine, as though he had delivered a punchline worthy of a stage. My Aunt Monica dabbed the corner of her lips with her napkin and added coolly, "Legacy is built on strength. It is a shame some among us confuse sacrifice with failure. But I suppose not everyone can be cut from the same cloth." Her eyes flicked toward me, sharp and deliberate, before returning to the man beside her. He chuckled obediently, eager to bask in her approval. Every word landed like a lash across my skin. I stared at the food cooling on my plate, the turkey meat glistening, the potatoes whipped into perfect clouds, but I couldn't force myself to swallow a bite. Their voices grew louder, their jokes sharper, until the entire table was alive with ridicule. Even the younger cousins, desperate for attention, joined in. "Rachel, maybe next year you'll bring something other than yourself," one called down the table. Another chimed in. "She can't even keep a boyfriend. How could she ever keep this family's name?" The words blurred together, a chorus of contempt, until it was not one voice or two, but an entire symphony of mockery. My father raised his glass again, silencing them with a single gesture. He looked directly at me, his expression triumphant, and said, "Every family has one. Ours is no different. Be grateful we let you sit in the room." A hush followed, heavier than the laughter had been. My breath caught in my throat, my heart hammering so violently I thought it might split my ribs. I wanted to scream, to tell them about the nights in the hospital, about the sacrifices they had never made, about the love they had thrown away. I wanted to stand, to overturn the table, to break every crystal glass that had ever held a toast against me. But I did not. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my gaze steady on the flickering candles. Because silence was my weapon. Silence was the only defiance left to me. The humiliation seared deeper with every second burning into memory. I could feel it etching itself into the story of my life, another scar to carry alongside the others. And yet beneath the sting, beneath the ache in my chest, and the tremor in my hands, something harder began to take shape. Not hope, not yet, but a seed of certainty. They believed their laughter was victory. They believed my silence was surrender. But I knew what was coming. I knew there was a letter waiting to be read, words written in my grandfather's hand, words that would turn their feast into famine and their laughter into silence. I looked at each of them in turn at Ethan with his smug smirk at Monica, with her dagger smile at my father with his glass raised in mock triumph, and I memorized the sound of their laughter, because soon, very soon, I would watch it die. The laughter at the table blurred into an echo, each voice fading into the background as another voice rose in my mind, my own, younger, smaller, trembling with the desperate need to be seen. I was 10 years old again, standing in the parlor with a drawing clutched between my hands. I had spent hours on that sketch, outlining every detail of the family estate, shading the windows, drawing each person who lived inside. At the center, I had placed my grandfather seated proudly, and beside him, me holding his hand. I had waited for the right moment to show my father, waited for the chance to be praised, to be told I was part of something that mattered. He took the paper from my hands, glanced at it once, and without a word, crumpled it into a ball. He tossed it into the wastebasket by his desk, where it landed on top of torn envelopes and discarded notes. "Stop wasting your time," he said flatly. "This family is built on work, not childish scribbles." The sting of that moment had never left me. At 16, the wound deepened. The Whitmores had planned their annual summer trip to Europe, a tradition meant to showcase wealth and reinforce status. I had packed a bag, believing for once that I was included. I had even spent weeks practicing French phrases, excited to walk the streets of Paris to see the museums my grandfather loved. But on the morning of departure, I found my name missing from the list. My father told me I would not be going. "You haven't earned it," he said, his tone final, unbending. The others boarded the jet while I stood on the driveway, suitcase in hand, the roar of the engines drowning out the sound of my own tears. They returned weeks later with stories and photographs, all of which excluded me as though I had never been part of them at all. At 22, the final cut came. I had earned a scholarship to complete my MBA abroad, the opportunity of a lifetime, the first step toward building something entirely my own. But it was also the year my grandfather's health collapsed. He needed someone to stay. No one else volunteered. My father claimed he was too busy running the company. Monica said her schedule was full of charity galas. Ethan shrugged, saying it was not his responsibility. So I stayed. I declined the scholarship, boxed away the acceptance letters, and moved into my grandfather's home. I spent nights adjusting oxygen tanks, mornings blending meals soft enough for him to swallow afternoons, reading aloud when his eyes clouded. When he asked me why I did it, I smiled and told him I wanted to, and I did. But there were nights when I lay awake listening to his labored breathing and wondered why love always demanded sacrifice from me alone. Each of those memories pressed against my chest as I sat at that side table on Thanksgiving night. They were scars invisible to the people around me, scars that had shaped me into someone who knew exactly what it meant to be discarded. They laughed now because they believed my place at the margins was permanent. They believed humiliation was all I had ever known and all I would ever know. But they were wrong. Because in the hospital, months before he died, my grandfather had reached for my hand with a strength that startled me. His voice was weak, raspy, but it carried the weight of conviction. "Rachel," he whispered, "I see you. I always have. And when I am gone, they will see you too. Not because they want to, but because I will leave them no choice." I had not fully understood then what he meant. But as the laughter rolled down the table, as the taste of bitterness coated my tongue, I felt the memory of his words settle into me like steel. I lifted my eyes to the head of the table, to the empty chair that once belonged to him. The firelight flickered across its carved arms, its leather seat polished from decades of use. It stood like a sentinel, like a reminder that the man they had ignored, the man they had dismissed, still held the power to silence them. And so I endured. I let the laughter wash over me, let the humiliation sting like salt in an open wound, because I knew what they did not, that every scar I carried had been leading to this night, to this moment, to the letter waiting in the lawyer's briefcase. And when it was read aloud, those scars would no longer be my shame. They would be my inheritance. The clinking of glasses was still fading when a voice cleared at the far end of the room. It was quiet, steady, but it cut through the noise like the strike of a gavel. Heads turned reluctantly, eyes narrowing as though they had forgotten he was even there. David Morton, the family lawyer, rose slowly from his chair, adjusting the lapels of his gray suit. His expression was unreadable, but his presence commanded a silence the rest of us could not. "I was asked to attend this Thanksgiving gathering for a reason," he began, his voice calm, professional, carrying weight in its simplicity. "Before he passed, your grandfather entrusted me with a final letter. He requested that it be read aloud tonight in front of all of you." The air shifted. Forks paused mid-air. Conversations died on lips. My father stiffened in his seat, the smirk draining from his face. Monica's eyes narrowed like sharpened blades, suspicion flickering across her features. Ethan leaned back, feigning nonchalance, but I could see his jaw tighten, the faintest twitch in his temple. Mr. Morton reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope. Its edges worn the handwriting across it, unmistakable, my grandfather's, looping and deliberate. My heart slammed against my ribs. I remembered that hand, frail but steady, gripping a pen in the hospital room. I remembered the way he pressed my fingers as he signed, whispering, "They will not see you coming, Rachel." The lawyer broke the seal and unfolded the paper. His voice, though calm, rang with authority as he began to read. "To my family," the letter said, "if you are hearing these words, it means I have gone, and with my absence there will be those who believe legacy belongs to the loudest voices, to the wealthiest hands, to the most polished names. But legacy is not found in titles or bank accounts. It is found in character." A murmur rippled down the table. Ethan scoffed quietly. Monica rolled her eyes, and my father shifted uncomfortably. "I have watched you all," the letter continued, "and I have seen how quickly affection is traded for appearances, how loyalty bends to convenience, how love is measured by what it gains rather than what it gives. But I have also seen one among you who gave without asking, who stayed when all others left, who sacrificed without reward. Rachel." My name landed in the silence like a stone dropped into still water, the ripples undeniable. Every eye turned toward me. My chest tightened, breath catching in my throat, but I kept my gaze steady on the letter, refusing to look away. "It is for this reason," the letter went on, "that I have amended my estate. Effective immediately, the controlling shares of Whitmore Holdings, valued at $85 million, along with the estate itself and the trust accounts tied to it, are transferred solely to Rachel Whitmore. She is the one who has earned not just my inheritance, but my faith. The rest of you have proven yourselves skilled in performance, but unskilled in love. Consider this my final lesson." The room froze. Forks clattered onto plates, a glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered against the floor, but no one moved to clean it. My father's face drained of color, his jaw locked tight. Ethan's smirk vanished, replaced by a stunned gape, his wineglass trembling in his hand. Monica let out a sharp, bitter laugh, her voice rising in disbelief. "This is absurd." She snapped her chair, scraping against the floor as she stood. $85 million, control of the company handed to her. No court would uphold such nonsense. But Mr. Morton remained unshaken. He lifted another document from his briefcase, stamped and notarized, signatures glinting in ink. "It has already been filed," he said firmly. "The court has validated the amendment. There is no contesting it." Silence fell heavier than before, pressing into the very walls. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock, each beat echoing like a hammer driving nails into their pride. I sat, frozen, my mind reeling. $85 million, controlling shares. The estate. The words swirled around me, surreal, impossible, yet real in the ink and paper that Mr. Morton held. My hands trembled under the table, but I forced myself to remain still. For once, it was not me who looked small. It was them. My father slammed his fist against the table, the glasses rattling. "This is a mistake," he barked. "Rachel is not capable of running this family's legacy. She was never meant for it. I am his son. I have built this empire." "No," Mr. Morton replied quietly but firmly. "You inherited an empire. Rachel built loyalty. And Robert Whitmore was very clear. Legacy belongs to her." Monica shook her head violently, her earrings swaying with the force. "He was manipulated," she spat. "Sick and weak. She was alone with him for months. How do we know she didn't twist his mind?" Her words sliced, but Mr. Morton was ready. He pulled another envelope from his case and held it up. "Your father recorded his decision, his voice, his words, his reasoning. If you'd like, I can play it for everyone here tonight." The room went utterly still. The thought of hearing his voice again, my grandfather's voice, sent a shiver through me. But for the others, it was not grief that silenced them. It was fear. Fear that the proof was undeniable. Fear that their performance had already been judged and found wanting. I looked at them then. My father's trembling rage, Monica's desperate denial, Ethan's stunned silence, and for the first time in my life, I did not feel invisible. I felt the ground shift beneath us, all the balance of power tilting until their laughter collapsed into silence. Mr. Morton unfolded a second page from the envelope, the paper slightly yellowed, the ink pressed deep into the fibers as though each word had been carved with purpose. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and began again. "My family," the letter read, "you have heard the distribution of my estate, but I want you to hear why. Too often, wealth is passed like a torch handed down without question, and those who inherit it believe it is their right rather than their responsibility. I refuse to make that mistake. I refuse to let my legacy fall into the hands of those who have not earned it." My breath caught. The room seemed to lean toward his voice, the silence so complete that even the crackle of the fire sounded like thunder. For years, I watched how you treated one another. I watched dinners like this one where laughter became a weapon, where cruelty passed as tradition, where dignity was stripped from those who deserved better. I saw how some of you, Charles, Monica, Ethan, used the Whitmore name as a shield to protect your arrogance, to justify your greed. You believed appearances mattered more than truth. You believed wealth excused neglect. But legacy is not measured by glass towers or stock portfolios. Legacy is measured by love. Gasps rippled down the table. My father's jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the edge of the table. Monica bristled, her face flushing crimson. Ethan's eyes darted toward the lawyer, then toward me, as though hoping to find a crack in the foundation of these words. There was none. "I do not write this to shame you." The letter continued, but to reveal what you refused to see. When illness claimed my strength, it was not Charles who stayed. He was too busy, too proud, too convinced that my legacy was already his. It was not Monica who spoke of charity at galas, but could not find an hour to sit at my bedside. It was not Ethan who paraded his degrees and investments, but never once brought me comfort when I struggled to breathe. It was Rachel. Rachel who gave without being asked. Rachel who missed opportunities, who sacrificed her youth, who read to me when my eyes failed, who held my hand when the pain threatened to drown me. She was my legacy long before I put it in writing. I pressed the napkin to my mouth, fighting the sting in my eyes. My chest swelled with a mix of grief and vindication, the sound of his voice in those words pulling me back to those quiet nights in the hospital when it was just the two of us against the silence of machines. The letter did not spare them. "Charles," it said, "you have mistaken control for leadership. You have mistaken fear for respect. A man who rules by force leaves nothing behind but resentment. Monica, you have spent your years sharpening your tongue, mistaking cruelty for wit, mistaking manipulation for power. You leave people smaller than you found them, and that is no legacy worth carrying. Ethan, you have grown in privilege, not in wisdom. You inherited doors already open, but you claim you built them. You wear arrogance as though it were an accomplishment, but arrogance is empty. It collapses when tested." The air in the dining hall thickened. No one moved. No one dared breathe. I looked at each of them, my father's face hard as stone, Monica's lips pressed tight, Ethan's flush creeping up his neck. For once, they were the ones who had to sit in silence while their worth was measured and found wanting. "Rachel," the letter went on, "you are not perfect, and I never expected you to be. But you are kind. You are steady. You are strong. You have the one thing this family has forgotten: integrity. That is why I leave the company, the estate, and the wealth in your hands. Not as a gift, but as recognition of what you have already given me. Do not let their bitterness sway you. Do not let their envy dim you. Stand firm. You have earned this." Tears blurred my vision, but I refused to let them fall. I lifted my chin, holding steady, because I knew that is what he would want. He had not written these words to break me open, but to seal me with strength. Mr. Morton lowered the paper slowly, his eyes scanning the room. The silence that followed was suffocating. No one laughed. No one smirked. The same mouths that had spat venom minutes ago were clamped shut. their pride crushed under the weight of my grandfather's final judgment. I looked at the empty chair at the head of the table, the seat my grandfather had once filled, and I swore I could almost hear his voice again. "They will not see you coming, Rachel, but they will see you at the end." And now they had. My father broke first. He shoved back his chair, the legs screeching against the polished floor, and stood with a face like iron. "This is madness," he growled. "No letter, no words can erase a lifetime of legacy. That company is mine. This estate is mine. She is nothing." But the words rang hollow, brittle, stripped of their weight. For the first time, his power cracked. I sat straighter in my chair, my heart pounding, but my voice steady when I finally spoke. "Not anymore." The silence cracked not with surrender, but with rage. My father's fist came down on the table so hard that the crystal rattled and wine sloshed over the rim of his glass. His face was crimson, his jaw clenched, his voice booming with fury. "This is fraud," he thundered. "Robert would never strip me of my birthright. I am his son. I have given my life to this company. This letter, these papers, they are lies. They will not stand." Monica shot to her feet, her bracelets clinking as her hands sliced the air. "You think we'll just hand it over?" She snapped, her voice shrill. $85 million the estate, the company handed to a girl who has done nothing but hide behind sickbeds and sentimentality over my dead body. Ethan leaned forward, his smirk replaced by a sneer. "You can barely pay your rent, Rachel. Do you have any idea what it takes to run Whitmore Holdings? Do you think sitting in a hospital room qualifies you to manage properties worth hundreds of millions? You'll destroy everything. And when you do, don't think for a second we'll be there to pick up the pieces." The words rained down like arrows, sharp and merciless, but I did not flinch. My hands trembled beneath the table, but I held my posture straight, my gaze fixed on them. Mr. Morton placed the notarized documents firmly on the table, his tone even. "The amendment is legally binding. The court has already validated it. Rachel is now the controlling shareholder. The estate is hers. That is not an opinion. It is law." My father's eyes blazed. "Law can be challenged," he barked. "I'll call every judge I know. I'll drag this through the courts until she is bled dry." I finally spoke, my voice steady, though my pulse thundered in my ears. "You can try, but you'll lose. The filings are public record as of last week. The accounts are already transferred. The shares are already registered in my name. Every move has been witnessed, documented, signed. There is nothing left for you to contest." Monica's face twisted. "You conniving little—" she began, but I cut her off, my voice sharper than hers had ever been. "Careful. Every word you spit only proves what Grandpa wrote. You never loved him. You loved what he gave you. And now that it is gone, so is your mask." Her mouth snapped shut, fury radiating from her eyes. My father's breathing grew ragged, his chest heaving as though every breath carried the weight of decades slipping through his fingers. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "You will not survive in this family. You may have the papers, but you do not have the power. These people," he gestured to the table, "they will never follow you." I leaned forward, my words deliberate, each one a nail in the coffin of his pride. "Then they will step aside, because from tonight forward I am not asking for their loyalty. I am demanding their accountability. You don't have to follow me, Father. You just have to obey the law." Gasps echoed down the table. Ethan stood abruptly, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. "You think you can humiliate us and walk away?" he shouted. "We'll ruin you. We'll smear your name until you have nothing left but ashes. Whitmore Holdings will collapse under your incompetence, and when it does, we'll be waiting to take it back." I rose slowly from my chair, my palms flat against the table, the weight of generations pressing beneath my hands. My voice was low, but it carried across the room like steel. "Then you'll have to watch from the outside. Because as of tonight, Whitmore Holdings is mine. The board has been notified. The bank accounts are secured. The deeds to the estate have already been transferred. You can scream, you can threaten, you can sulk, but none of it changes the truth. You no longer hold the power here. I do." The room quivered with tension. Monica's breathing came fast. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. My father's glare, a storm that could have torn through walls. Yet beneath it all, their fury had the hollow sound of desperation. They had lost, and they knew it. Still, I gave them no escape. "You want proof?" I asked. Reaching into my bag, I laid out copies of the court filings stamped and dated. "You want legitimacy? Here are the registration papers listing me as CEO of Whitmore Holdings as of this morning. You want to test me? Try me. Every legal door has already been closed to you." The documents spread across the table like cards in a final hand, each one undeniable. Their eyes flicked across them rage, giving way to something worse, fear. My father sank back into his chair, his hands shaking as he gripped the armrests. Monica turned away, her face pale beneath her makeup. Ethan swallowed hard, his bravado cracking his smirk gone. I straightened my chest, rising with a breath that felt like the first I had taken in years. For once, they were the ones forced to endure the silence. For once, their humiliation was the feast served at this table. "Grandpa was right," I said, finally, my voice calm, almost gentle. "Legacy is not about what you take. It's about what you give. And tonight you've given me exactly what I needed, proof that I was never the weak one. You were. Because strength is not cruelty. Strength is not greed. Strength is knowing who you are when the room turns against you. And I know who I am. Do you?" No one answered. The fire crackled, the clock ticked, and the empire they had claimed as theirs crumbled silently between us. The storm of their fury had broken, but the silence that followed was heavier than any shouting. I stood at the end of the table, my hands resting on the polished wood. The documents spread before me like a verdict carved in stone. For the first time in my life, I did not feel like a shadow at this table. I felt like the one holding the light. "I will not run this family the way you did," I said quietly, though my voice carried to every corner of the dining hall. "Grandpa left me more than money. He left me his faith, and I intend to honor it." My father scoffed, though the sound was weak, brittle. "Honor," he muttered. "You know nothing about honor. You'll destroy everything." "No," I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "You already did. You destroyed it when you turned family into competition, when you measured love in dividends, when you used legacy as a weapon. I am here to rebuild, not to destroy." Monica's lips curled, her voice dripping venom. "Rebuild with what? With charity, with pity? You'll bankrupt us all." I smiled faintly, not with triumph, but with resolve, with accountability, with transparency, with respect. Words you've never understood, but words this family needs if it is to survive. I turned to Mr. Morton. "Please notify the board effective immediately. All senior leadership positions will be reviewed. Any misuse of funds, any mismanagement will be addressed, and any member of this family who cannot meet the standards of integrity will be removed." Gasps rippled through the room. My father's face blanched. Monica stiffened. Ethan's eyes widened. For once, the consequences of their actions were no longer hidden, no longer excused. "I will also be establishing a foundation," I continued, funded through a portion of the estate. "It will provide scholarships for students who, like me, were told they were not enough. It will support the employees who built Whitmore Holdings brick by brick, the ones you dismissed as replaceable. They will no longer be forgotten." My words fell like stones into water, rippling outward, breaking the illusion of untouchable wealth. This was no longer about greed. It was about justice. Ethan sputtered, desperate to claw back control. "You can't just give it away. That money is ours." I turned to him, my voice firm. "No, it was never yours. It was never mine. It was his. And he chose how it would be used. That choice has been made. You can either accept it or you can watch from the sidelines as I carry it out." My father tried one final strike. "The board will never accept you," he growled. "They'll laugh you out of the room." I leaned forward, my voice cutting clean through the tension. "Then let them laugh. I have endured laughter my entire life, and every time I have endured. But this time, the law is on my side. The shares are mine. The votes are mine. They can laugh all they want, but they will still answer to me." The fight drained from the room. My father slumped into his chair, his shoulders sagging under the weight of defeat. Monica's glare dimmed into resignation, though her pride kept her silent. Ethan sat stiffly, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the table as though looking anywhere but at me. I stood tall, breathing slowly, feeling the strength in my own stillness. I had not screamed. I had not begged. I had not lowered myself to their cruelty. And still, I had won. Later that night, when the plates were cleared and the guests had left in stunned silence, I walked the halls of the estate alone. The portraits of Whitmore's past lined the walls, stern faces gazing down with painted eyes. For years, I had felt their stares as judgment, as though I would never measure up. But tonight, I looked back without flinching. Tonight, I felt them watching with something else, acknowledgement, perhaps even approval. I entered my grandfather's study, the room still carrying his scent of tobacco and old books. His chair sat by the window, empty now, but in my mind I could see him there, smiling faintly, nodding as if to say, "I told you they would see you." I laid my hand on the desk, tracing the grain of the wood, and whispered, "I hope I made you proud." The days that followed brought consequences swift and sharp. My father was forced to resign from his position on the board, his name stripped from the masthead he had once ruled with an iron fist. Monica's access to the family trust was revoked after auditors uncovered discrepancies she could no longer deny. Ethan's pet projects collapsed when funding dried up, his reputation bruised, his arrogance curdled into silence. They had mocked me for years, but now they were the ones forced to face humiliation. For me, the victory was not in their downfall, but in my rise. I established the foundation, cut the salaries of overpaid executives to reinvest in workers, and reopened properties long neglected to serve communities instead of draining them. Slowly, the Whitmore name began to change, not from greed to sainthood, but from arrogance to accountability. And every step I carried my grandfather's words like a compass. I no longer needed their approval. I no longer sought their laughter to turn to applause. I no longer cared if they saw me as worthy, because I knew finally and fully that my worth was never theirs to measure.